Dark family secrets, life or death moments, and unbelievable survival stories. Are you ready for the truth? Story 1. A split second to disaster. I was 19, driving to the airport late at night to pick up my dad. Cruising at about 65 miles per hour, I suddenly came up behind an old Honda Odyssey creeping along at 40 miles per hour with its hazards on. Figuring I'd just pass, I switched lanes, only to see sparks showering the road ahead. A second later, the van's entire front wheel, rim and all, detached and rocketed straight into my lane. I had less than a heartbeat to react. I slammed the brakes, but it was too late. The loose wheel smashed into my front passenger side tire, jolting my car onto two wheels. For 3 agonizing seconds, my car teetered on the edge of flipping at 55 miles per hour. Every muscle in my body braced for the inevitable roll. This is it. This is how I flip. But somehow, miraculously, the car slammed back onto all 4 wheels. I swerved wildly between 2 lanes for nearly a quarter mile before regaining control. Still in shock, I drove another half mile before finally pulling over. The other driver, who had just lost his wheel, pulled over too. We were both shaken but unharmed. To this day, it remains the most terrifying moment of my life. Story 2. Grandma's glasses, my doom. As a kid living with my grandparents, I loved playing outside. One day I was swinging a stick around like a sword, lost in my imaginary battle. When I got bored, I went inside, but kept waving it around like an idiot. Then disaster struck. I knocked my grandma's glasses off the table. The moment they hit the floor and shattered, my stomach dropped. We were poor, barely scraping by. Those glasses must have cost her a fortune. My mind raced. I am dead. To make things worse, my grandma was outside clearing the backyard with a machete. I sat there, frozen in pure dread, convinced she was going to cut me into pieces and feed me to the pigs. I don't even remember crying, just that sinking feeling of impending doom. She walked in, took one look at her broken glasses and scolded me. But she didn't cut me into pieces. Story 3. Drowning at La Jolla. This year I almost drowned at La Jolla. The tide was deceptively strong, but I didn't notice at first. I was just messing around on my boogie board, having fun. Then I glanced back at the shore, and realized I was much farther out than everyone else. Panic hit like a freight train. I kicked as hard as I could, trying to swim back, but no matter what I did, I kept getting pulled farther away. The waves towered over me, swallowing my view of the shore. That's when it truly hit me: if I can't see them, they can't see me either. Desperate, I made a stupid decision. I thought my boogie board was weighing me down, so I threw it away. Then I started swimming with everything I had. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting the tide, I was caught in a rip current. I had no energy left. My limbs felt like lead. I stopped fighting and focused only on staying afloat. I waved my arms and screamed for help, but the beach was so far away. I remember thinking, no one can hear me. And worse, I probably don't even look like I'm drowning. For a few terrifying moments, I accepted it. This is it. This is how I die. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a lifeguard swimming toward me. Guess I wasn't going to die after all. Story 4. A near-death freeway crash. It was 12:30 a.m., traffic was light, and I was driving down the freeway in my Nissan Cube when a Honda Accord came flying past me at 80 to 90 miles per hour. The driver tried to squeeze between me and an 18-wheeler, but something went horribly wrong. I caught his headlights swerving in my side mirror just before he lost control and slammed into the back of my car. Everything flipped. My car rolled over and skidded upside down the freeway, sparks shooting into the night. Time slowed as I watched the roof scrape against the asphalt. My only thought? This is how I die. And this is the last thing I'll ever see. Then, oh, I slammed into the guardrail. My music was still playing as I hung upside down in my seatbelt. Somehow, I managed to unbuckle, open the door, and roll out. My passenger side was completely crushed. I reached for my phone to call 911, but it was still connected to Bluetooth. No sound. No response. I fumbled to turn off my car and call again. Meanwhile, the guy who hit me had also ended up upside down. But instead of calling for help, he ran up to me and said, "Call a tow truck, not 911. I stared at him. Our cars are upside down on the freeway. I'm calling 911. And then he took off on foot. The 18-wheeler had somehow avoided hitting me, even though we had crossed paths in the chaos. To this day, I don't know how I survived. Maybe it was my Cube's high, boxy roof. People always laughed at me for driving it, but that weird little car saved my life. The insurance nightmare that followed? That's a different horror story. Story 5. The chemo that almost killed me. Before my first chemo treatment, my doctor warned me about a rare allergic reaction, potentially fatal. I shrugged it off. What else could I do? The treatment began. My dad sat beside me as the 4 drips started. About 15 minutes in, I felt fine, so he left to grab a drink. Another 10 minutes passed. Then, bam! A crushing nausea hit out of nowhere. My skull felt like it was caving in. My vision tunneled. I couldn't breathe. That's when I realized, this is it. This is the reaction. I'm dying. My dad was going to walk back in and find me dead. Then, suddenly, the nurse sprinted in and shut off the 4. Instantly, the symptoms disappeared. Turns out, it wasn't the rare reaction at all. Just a common side effect. One that feels like you're dying but actually isn't dangerous. The doctor later apologized for not warning me about it. Didn't stop me from nearly having a heart attack. Story 6. Trapped above a sinking submarine. I was attached to a submarine that was sinking, at night. The worst part? The air systems had failed and no one realized there was a problem. The sub dropped to about 40 feet below the surface, but I wasn't inside it. I was tangled in multiple air and communication lines, suspended above it. As I struggled to free myself, my vision began to gray out. Tunnel vision crept in. I knew I was running out of air. Desperate, I pulled myself down the tangled lines, reaching blindly for a regulator. I knew the sub's air systems were dead, but I prayed there was something left in the lines. My hand landed on a spare pony bottle's regulator. I jammed it into my mouth just before blacking out. When I came to, I was still floating above the sub, barely clinging to consciousness. Meanwhile, my dive buddy had surfaced, completely unaware of what had happened. He hadn't seen me descend, assumed I bailed, and left me for dead. The surface crew thought I was still diving. No one realized I was trapped. By the time they figured it out and sent a rescue diver, I was mentally checked out. I wanted nothing more than to never dive again. But instead of pulling me up, they tied a rope around my waist and sent me back down to retrieve the submarine. Story 7. The ice took the wheel. Driving home after Christmas, I had a long, snowy drive ahead of me, 4 hours of it. Then suddenly the weather cleared and the roads looked fine. Thinking I was safe, I sped up to about 80 kilometers per hour. Then I hit black ice. My car spun out. I had just passed over a bridge when I lost control, heading straight for the rock face on the side of the road. I had just enough time to think, I'm either dead or seriously injured. Then, somehow, my car changed direction. Instead of smashing into the rock face, I spun backward across the eastbound lanes, through the snowy median, and across the westbound lanes. I looked out my driver's side window and saw a wall of cars speeding toward me. Then, somehow I came to a stop. I was off the road, facing west, slightly down a hill. My heart pounded as I sat there in stunned silence. Then I picked up my phone and called my mom, my work, and a tow truck. When the tow truck arrived, 2 police officers showed up too. One of them looked at my car, then at me and said, "Where's your halo? Because you should be dead." Somehow my car only had minor scratches. They had to wedge it out of the snow and I got back on the road. The rest of the drive, which should have taken 3 hours, took 5. I white-knuckled the steering wheel the entire way. Story 8. Spinning on the freeway at 1 a.m. My nephew and I were practically brothers growing up, so at 17 we often hung out late. One night we got bored and decided to just drive. No destination. Just cruising the city at 1 a.m. Our parents didn't care, we were good kids, never got into trouble beyond the occasional speeding ticket. A light rain started to fall. I was driving and didn't notice my speed creeping up. Then we approached a notoriously sharp curve. I assumed I was going the right speed. I wasn't. The car spun out. Everything blurred. I had never skidded before, I had no idea how to correct it. We spun and spun, completely at the mercy of momentum, waiting for the inevitable crash. Either into the concrete barrier or into another car. The scariest part? This was an industrial zone full of massive big rigs. Then, somehow, we came to a perfect stop. We weren't upside down. We weren't crashed. The only problem? We were facing the wrong way in the right lane of the freeway. Silence filled the car as we processed what just happened. Then, out of nowhere, we burst into uncontrollable laughter. The kind of laughter you only get when you've just cheated death. Even decades later, we agreed, our parents would never hear that story. But there was no way we weren't telling our friends. Story 9. The House with the Vanishing Man. When I was 10, I spent the summer at my grandparents' house in a small rural town. Their house was old, one of those creaky wooden homes where every step felt like walking on a haunted floorboard. One night, I woke up thirsty and went to get a glass of water. As I passed by the living room, I saw a man standing by the window. I froze. He wasn't anyone I recognized. He was just standing there perfectly still, staring outside. My heart pounded. I was about to scream when he suddenly turned his head toward me, except he had no face, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin. I bolted back to my room and hid under the covers, shaking. I barely slept that night. The next morning I told my grandma, expecting her to brush it off. Instead she got very quiet. Then she said, "That's why we never look out the windows at night." That was the last summer I ever spent there. Story 10, The Train Tunnel Dare. When I was 14, my friends and I thought we were invincible. One summer we found an old train tunnel, long, dark, and abandoned. Or so we thought. One of my friends dared me to run through it alone. It wasn't a long tunnel, maybe a 30-second sprint, so I accepted. I took a deep breath and ran in. Halfway through, I heard a sound behind me. At first, I thought it was just echoes of my footsteps, until I realized the rhythm was off. I stopped. The sound didn't. It was footsteps. Someone else was in there with me. I turned around and saw nothing but darkness. The footsteps stopped too. Chills ran down my spine. I turned back toward the exit and sprinted as fast as I could. The second I made it out, I turned around. The tunnel was empty. I never went back. Story 11, The Cabin in the Woods. A few years ago, my friends and I rented a remote cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us and nature. The first night, around 2 a.m., we heard something outside. At first, we assumed it was an animal, until we heard whispers. We turned off the lights and peeked through the window. There were figures standing in the woods. Just barely visible in the moonlight. Not moving. Just watching. We didn't sleep that night. By morning they were gone. No footprints. No signs anyone had been there. We left that day and never went back. Story 12, The Shadow in the Hotel. During a road trip, I stayed in a cheap roadside motel. It wasn't great, but I was exhausted. I fell asleep quickly. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the feeling of being watched. I opened my eyes, and there was a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. My body locked up. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My mind kept racing. Is this sleep paralysis? A dream? Or is someone actually in my room? Then the figure moved. I shot up and turned on the bedside lamp. No one was there. The door was still locked, the windows shut. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I checked out first thing in the morning. Story 13, The Man in the Backseat. I was driving home late one night when I stopped at a red light. I glanced in my rearview mirror, just a habit. There was a man sitting in my backseat. My heart stopped. I slammed on the gas, ran the red light, and swerved into a gas station parking lot under bright lights. I turned around. The back seat was empty. I sat there shaking for a good 10 minutes before driving home, constantly checking the mirror. I still don't know what I saw that night. Story 14, The Old Lady in the Window. When I was a kid, there was an abandoned house on my street. The windows were boarded up, the yard overgrown. It had been empty for years. One evening, while playing outside, I looked up at one of the windows. An old woman was staring down at me. I ran inside to tell my mom. When she looked, there was no one there. She told me it was probably my imagination. The next day, the house burned down. Firefighters said it was empty. But I know what I saw. Sometimes, the most innocent-seeming stories hide the darkest secrets. And sometimes, the people suffering the most are right in front of us, completely unnoticed. Have you ever experienced something that, at first, seemed normal, but later turned out to be something much more chilling? Tell me in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe, because trust me, this rabbit hole only goes deeper.